Hey, good evening, internets. Let's talk about The Revolt of the Masses by Jose Ortega y Gasset. Um, our reading for this video was just chapters, sections? What do you call them? Chapters 1 to 5. So, not much, actually. Not much in the sense that we're missing some key elements. There's some really interesting stuff here, but it all feels like build up to something even more powerful that we're not going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the build up to something more interesting later.
Yeah, this is the setup to a bigger argument, and where he's going to make the smash, checkmate. Let's see how many other metaphors I can mix. A touchdown. That's going to be next. This is going to be the setup to his argument. But I guess we can just say, just right out, I don't know, he's not a very well-known philosopher. If in philosophy circles he is, but I don't think to the general populace he's that well-known. I guess we just frame who he is and where the kind of tradition he's in. He's obviously in the existentialist tradition. Right?
Very early.
Kind of, a proto
existentialist. Yeah. If you count him as one, yeah.
Yeah.
But like considering the stuff in this book, I would definitely locate him in the existentialist tradition, though.
Yeah, he's been influenced by many philosophers. Nietzsche was one of his influences, and he also
was influenced by Husserl.
Husserl.
I mean, who also went on to influence Heidegger and Sartre. So.
Yeah, and Gasset, Ortega actually influenced Heidegger himself. I should just say too that if you look anything up about Ortega, you'll see that his most famous statement is, "I am I in my circumstances, and freedom is being free inside a given fate." I mean, these are the things he's known for saying. Mostly, I'd also say that he wants to take existential analysis and philosophical analysis and use it in history. He's a historical philosopher. I think he wants to kind of be in the tradition of Hegel, using philosophy in a historical system. So he's going to be a kind of a little bit different in that sense. Not many existentialists are kind of philosophers of history itself. So in that sense, I think he's taking a really nice and interesting step here. He's the beginning of this right now in the 21st century. Right now, we've got the history of everything, right, and the philosophy of the history of everything. But I don't know, philosophy for a long time seemed to be almost anti-historical. Seemed not to look at history very much, and we only had kind of very standout figures like Hegel, who kind of saw philosophy as a process or a system that we looked at. But Ortega seems to have a more kind of sophisticated or psychological approach to history, which is going to be very helpful and nice, I think.
Yes, so I think you're right. I kind of want to talk about like these first 5 sections. There's really a lot of stuff in here, interesting stuff in here, but a lot of it's building up. The stuff that we could talk about is he's trying to set up the scene. So he's writing. This was released in 1930, I think. 1930 something, but
was it 1932?
1932. So he's setting up how modern man got to be the way he was in kind of a historical. I guess he kind of goes back to, well, the 18th century, kind of up to his point in history, I guess, is where he's spanning most specifically in the first 5 sections.
Yeah, I mean, he does mention the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
For a little bit. I mean, I guess the most important thing is that he's going to have a vision of history, and why don't we just talk about his setup of his vision of history? So, I mean, I don't know if it would be fair to say this, but he kind of sees history as a rise and fall of vital energy, right? Which is going to be kind of a vague concept, perhaps, but I guess for him, it's kind of like if you want to say it in a different way, it's a fall of Renaissance and decadence in history, right? The rising and falling of energies and desires in a historical sense. Well, it's interesting when he talks about vital.
Yes, vital energy. This in vital possibilities and vital energy and vital time.
He's a vitalist when it comes to do historical analysis, right? He's going to say, well, and it's interesting though, but it's a psychological analysis, I guess. I mean, when you say vitality, sometimes it's hard to get a grip on what he's saying. I mean, he uses all these wonderful metaphors, like it's what powers the stars and things like that. But I mean, maybe it's something as simple as just kind of, I don't know, maybe if you want to use something like Final Fantasy, your life force or the energy of the time, maybe even just the sheer desire.
Yeah,
the
I would
desire
he
of
talks
the time.
about it close to just like motivation. I mean, and there's sometimes you just flat out don't feel motivated. You're like, back when I was a kid, I was so motivated, and now I got nothing. I mean, he kind of almost gives an analysis like this, like just
Drive.
just drive. Just take a look. Just ask someone, well, how are you feeling? Do you feel motivated? Do you think you were more motivated in the past? I mean, then he would probably give you a vital energy reading based on straightforward questions like that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what he's saying basically is that history is kind of rising and falling like this, but not in a sense of, I don't know, kind of objects, but actually in a psychological sense, is how each one of these eras feel about themselves, right? So he says the only way you can know if an era is decadent or not, if it's on the decline or not, is to ask it from the inside.
Yep.
How do you feel about yourself? Do you feel that this era is the time you wanted to live in, or would you rather live in a different time?
So I was trying to compare. I was trying to bring movies into our analysis. So this is maybe one of my only spots. I immediately, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Right here. Remember at the end of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, like, the time to live is now. Right? Because they went on all the time machine and the places. Like, Bill and Ted are like a great representative of like the feeling of now. Ortega describes, like, we kind of think our time is the best. And so do Bill and Ted.
Yeah. I that's interesting. I have to rewatch that movie actually. But I guess he said the majority of history is spent in periods of people feeling that their time is not the time they'd want to live in.
Yeah.
Majority of periods of history people feel are, from the inside, they themselves feel as decadent. They look back on a golden age. He puts that in quotes, a golden age. Sorry. They look back on a golden age or kind of a period of affluence that they can never live up to. And then occasionally history will rise back up, and then these periods see themselves as the fulfillment of ancient desires and struggles that have gone on for centuries, these kind of periods of heights, he calls them. So there's these kind of heights. And then as these heights come and these desires are satisfied, these people kind of lose themselves, right? They've satisfied their desires, and they have nothing to do, nothing to strive for anymore. So their people just become weaker and weaker. They stop striving to build new things, to make new institutions, to reach for the future once they become satiated. And the culture starts to go back into a decline. And then again, people start regaining feelings of longing and desire and wanting to build up to something even higher. So I guess that's kind of what he means in vitality, a sense of striving for the future, longing for something better. And so in a strange way, these heights of history end up being kind of when the well is dry.
Yeah,
right?
or it's kind of, he's got like a yin-yang thing going, right? Like, as soon as you get the maximum peak, your desire is satiated, then it just kind of, it dies and disappears. So like these ages he talked about at the end of, what was it, the end of...
the Roman Empire.
Roman Empire, and also he's talked about maybe kind of the end of the 19th century, the middle end of the 19th century. It was, people were satiated, and they thought they had fulfilled their desires, and they kind of dried up.
Right. I mean, so let's just take this for now. I mean, it's a period of rising and then falling again was the day, and then rising again. But all of these times kind of felt linked historically to one another, right? They saw themselves in light of other eras, and they saw their desires and projects as framed by their feeling in history, right? By their knowledge as framed. And by their knowledge of the previous time periods before it. So they're kind of a step in the historical ladder. So this has gone on for a long time, he says. This is just kind of what history has done for a long time, and this is his rough theory of history right at the moment and when he's writing this book. Okay, so that's the background for what's going on here. Okay, so now we have to do something even a little more complicated, right? Which is, so he says that it's been rising and falling all this time, until finally it got to the 1900s, and it rose to a period of opulence again. All the desires had dried up. People felt that they had reached the modern era, and they called it the modern times, right? And then it's interesting. He talks about the sadness of modernity, right? Which is a feeling that everything is finished. You can't make anything new. Everything's just going to continue the way it is forever. He talks about the feelings that the Romans had when they were walking through their cities, and they see Rome completed, and they do call Rome the Eternal City. It's one of its nicknames, right?
Yeah.
And they felt, some of these people, sensitive people, had a sense of sadness walking through Rome, because they knew that now that they had finished all these beautiful buildings and this wonderful architecture, nothing new could be built in Rome. It's forever. Nothing can change. And I have to admit, I had the exact same feeling walking through Rome myself. I mean, nothing can change in that city. I mean, by law, it's basically that way. They've kept the same architecture and structure for just ages now. I mean, there's not just Roman era buildings, but it does seem like it's this gigantic completed structure. And, you know, how can Rome change? I don't even know. It is the eternal city for a reason. And you feel almost a certain sadness and a beauty in the completed nature of Rome, which makes you wonder if all those kids spraying graffiti all over the place in Rome are trying desperately to, like, leave their mark on a city that's eternal. I don't know. Just a feeling I had when I was walking through Rome. But I totally understand this feeling that somehow it's reached a plateau and you can go no further. Well, that happened in the 1900s, right?
Late 1800s.
Late 1800s.
Around 1900, I guess.
Around 1900, yeah. So that happened there. Okay, and that's where this story kind of has to start, right? So we're going up and down and up and down and up and down. Finally, we hit this up period, and then something new is finally going to happen. Right? This is not part of the plan. Something new has begun. Okay, so let's talk about something new. What happened now?
Yes. So I don't know. I kind of took 3 points. I don't tell me. Maybe it's not really divisible into three because they're all interrelated. But I kind of took what he said to say. Kind of three things happened right at 1900 going on, or at the end of the 1800s going on. Number one was this peak, right? So people, the historical level, they felt they had peaked. They felt they had completed the project started maybe back from the days of Rome, and probably more specifically from the Enlightenment, from people like Kant and even Rousseau and all these guys. They felt they finally completed this and they had achieved the rights of man. People were now legally all masters of themselves and were provided equal opportunity under the law and autonomy under the law, and this was finished.
Yeah, so the average citizen got the rights of basically the aristocracy in Europe. Yes. They had achieved the rights of the aristocracy. They've achieved a kind of equality throughout Europe itself, which is...
It's kind of interesting. He leaves kind of a little time gap in there where they make it legally, but then these people who make it legally still don't really get it. And then they start dying, and this new generation starts being born into this new atmosphere with these laws already in place. And it becomes like part of their very being. There's this kind of like little mini gap, and where Ortega's picking up is after this gap has been filled, these people have come to fruition. These people have grown up, and they now believe this stuff to their very fundamental core.
This is all they know, is a world in which everyone is equal. So up until this point, Europe was not an egalitarian society. There was an aristocracy. There were people that were your betters, and that's just the way it was. And now finally people are growing up in Europe in a society that is not egalitarian, or that is totally egalitarian, at least in the law, under law. So these people grow up only knowing this, and in the same way, I mean, that's how America was founded. So Ortega kind of compares this to Americanization, but he says basically the conditions that exist in Europe just simply became the same as the conditions in America. So it looks like an Americanization, but it's actually just Europe having the same standards of life that America has now. So I don't know, I mean, like, you can say lots of different things. I don't know if I want to go too far with this, but if you want to use another movie reference, we can talk about The Incredibles, right? I mean, so, Syndrome's big idea was that he was going to make everybody super. He was going to make everyone a superhero, because when everyone's super, nobody is, right? I've seen that movie so many times. And that's not to say that when everyone has rights, nobody does. But that's not true. I mean, that's not true. When everyone has rights, everyone has rights. But what's interesting is you lose the consciousness of that.
Yeah.
They don't go away. They become invisible, right? You start losing the sense of history that came with those rights. You start losing the idea that there was a time when there were kings and queens who could do whatever they wanted with you, and you had nothing to say about that. So it's not that rights make rights go away. It's that when everyone has rights, they become almost invisible. They become a state of nature. They become part of the framework in which you look at the world, and thus kind of at the outer rim of it, right? The structure of your view. This is what I think is an important thing to take away from this.
Yes. I kind of, yeah, it's maybe more like the like what Ortega says, the historical level, like the historical level shifts, right? And we're all just starting from a different point now. Like these people used to start at a lower point, and now they start at a higher point. Maybe they're up to the level of the aristocracy now. They're just their starting point shifted up quite a bit for some. So okay, this historical, well, Ortega says historical level, it rises to the level of previously aristocracies. So this moves up. People are born. They believe they're fundamentally equal. They demand their equal rights. They know their equal rights, and they believe they should be treated equal rights. They're treated with equal rights. So this happens. And number two, I located the second change was these two. The last two I go together, but a kind of, I'm just going to say it, a kind of change in technology.
Yeah.
Technology changed the life world of humanity, and it exploded in a way never before seen, right? And he gets into this a little bit, but I mean, the long story short, I guess you get things like newspapers and radio and
the telegraph.
The telegraph. These things are coming and they're expanding.
Pictures.
Yes. I was right. Photography.
Photography.
Yes. These things are expanding how big our world is, what we can interact with. We can interact with people across continents. We can interact with people within hours or days when it used to take years. So our meaningful life world changes in such a way that we're affected by much more things, and by on the other side of that, we can do more things. We have more possibilities available to us. We could do so much more than before because there's just more stuff to be able to do. I guess the number of possibilities present to us, because we're always pressing into possibilities. Thank you, Heidegger. The number of possibilities open to us, kind of what he says, like becomes almost limitless. It becomes insane. I mean, I just imagine what Ortega would say if he was around now. I mean, he saw like 50 different kinds of mayonnaise, right? Oh, whoa, okay, right? Or the fact that you can just purchase or do things in 100 different ways. This would be my second change. And then of course he saw sports. Just in general, there's a lot of record breaking, sports record breaking, science record breaking, or scientific achievements. Einstein, quantum mechanics. The world seems to be changing and shifting, and it's opening up in new ways we never thought before. Sports records used to hold, but now they don't hold. The science used to be solid, but now it's broken. Now maybe quantum mechanics and Einstein has reintroduced ideas we never thought were possible. So all this stuff is opening up to new possibilities. And then my last thing that happened, the change, was this probably goes to technology, there was an enormous shift in birth rate. Just the sheer number of people increased, probably due to technological improvements initially, maybe sanitation, things like this, hospitals. But I like what he says, like, yeah, nutrition. I mean, there weren't enough. There were too many people for the system to handle. It just couldn't get around to everyone. We couldn't inculcate everyone into the old ways, and people were growing up without an education in traditional culture, but they were growing up under this view of rights. So they're kind of tabula rasa-esque in respect to traditional culture.
Right. I think that's basically the shift that happened in the beginning of the 1900s, right? I guess what he wants to say is basically, um, he wants to say there was a major break in history, a break that had never kind of happened before. Something new has begun in the early 1900s. I mean, it's interesting. Nietzsche tried to split history between, previous to the death of God and post the death of God. Ortega's going to put the split somewhere kind of in the same time frame, but he's going to split it due to social democracy, technology. What's interesting, I think, too, is that maybe a lot of that traditional culture was based on an aristocratic lifestyle, on the fact that they didn't have rights, right? Yeah. I mean, they changed the fundamental living structure in these countries. The traditional way of living has been eliminated. So there's a major break in history, and all these new people appear, and they're living basically in a different way than everyone has lived up until this point, right? Yeah. And not only that, they're living with major advances in technology and potential, and they can do and be a million more things than anyone in history could have ever dreamed of. I mean, this is the beauty of, this is the glory of technology. This is the world we live in now, right? We live in this world of super technology and not limitless options, but more options than, say, some dirt farmer in 1600 ever had or could ever dream of.
Or maybe even in the city of pigs that Socrates dreamed up.
Yeah,
there were a few options: hunter or protector, or maybe like if you lived in Dragon Quest or something. Or what are you, a mage or a fighter or what? Right. I mean, you got a couple. Right. That's it. You're done.
There's a couple of classes. There's 5 classes to choose, right?
Yeah.
Thief, sorcerer, fighter,
black mage, white mage. Yeah.
Right. Now they didn't need to think to incorporate like YouTube commenter. Don't worry, that's a thing now, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I don't know, this is what's important. There's a break in history, and it has to do with the fact that the common populace has gotten rights, thus breaking them off from previous ways of living, the fact that there's too many people, so they weren't raised in a traditional culture, the fact that technology has changed the conditions for them living. But all of this, I think what this all adds up to is the fact that these new people, and us too, to be honest, we have broken away from history. Yes. We are adrift in a new world. Right, and we look back into the past, and we can find nothing that resembles the conditions under which we live.
Yeah.
So here we are in a new era with new technology, new possibilities, but we don't have the wisdom and the path of the past anymore because we don't recognize those people. We don't recognize the people that bow before kings and have to grovel and have this kind of strict, rigid social structure, and even now today, I mean, a strict, rigid morality of any kind has been thrown away. So, I mean, when we look back at the past, we don't recognize a lot of the things we used to see anymore, right? So we're alone in history.
Yeah, this is a point where he brings up the fact that these modern people, when people make charges of decadence against modern society, this is a really interesting point. He says, like, actually, maybe, no, it's a little bit the opposite way. Modern people they have such a sense of superiority, they kind of look back at the past and like, why would I want to go there?
Right. I mean, if anyone seriously asked you, and you had to seriously make the answer, like, would you want to live now, or sometime in any time before, basically, I don't know, 1900? I don't know. It would take unless you were guaranteed to be some kind of king that ruled all of Persia, like Xerxes or something in 300. I don't know. You better pick and choose wisely, because even the kings of those days had nothing that we have now.
Yeah.
I think a lot of modern people couldn't fit in the past, and they would not understand the stifling, almost suffocating culture. We would see it as suffocating culture that these people lived in and under, right? I mean, a culture is kind of suffocating because it suffocates off possibilities.
Yeah.
Which is what we live and breathe in now. I don't know. I don't think many people could make it.
Yeah, Mr. Atos would have a tough time because they'd all go to the same time period, right?
Yes.
Library.
Just like 5 years before it exploded
Yeah,
again, right?
exactly.
Like, what,
They go
you're
back.
here again, right? Oh my. Okay, well, I just keep on going back 5 years.
You bump into yourself constantly
Yeah.
going into the library, so there's like 4 or 5 of you.
Are you again? Oh, okay. Star Trek reference. This is our history.
Yeah, it's the history of the future.
Right. I mean, I guess maybe it's not that it's impossible to pick out examples from history, but history just doesn't look familiar to a lot of people anymore. It's more difficult. And I think that is what's the most important point to take away up until this point. I think what he's driving at is we've broken away from history and thus lost a sense of direction.
Yeah.
We don't know. We have possibilities unforeseeable to anybody in ancient times or even semi-modern times, but we have nothing to do. Yeah. We have godlike powers compared to these people, but we don't know what to do with it, to the point where governments and cities are basically living day to day. They don't have any projects for the future. I remember going to a church in Milan, and it was a beautiful church there, but when I learned that it took 500 years, I think they said, to make it, that's the incredible part. The sheer force of will to take 500 years to do anything is almost unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I mean, we don't have the force of will to do something in like 10 years anymore, right? And it's just, nope, next.
Yeah.
Right? We just don't have the political willpower or the ability to do it anymore.
I wish they were a little bit more impatient with fixing the Parthenon, though.
Yeah, that's going to take quite a while.
Yeah.
That's 30 years, I believe.
Yeah, 30 years, I think. 30 more years, was it?
Yeah.
That's painful.
They're going to take their time doing that.
Yeah. Well, I suppose best not to rush.
Well, they do need that tourism. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that
I kind of was wondering about. Yeah, that's at that point. It's interesting. I mean, I agree. These ideals were fulfilled, and nobody prepared any new ones after they were fulfilled, kind of in a way. So they were fulfilled, and then they're like, well, what's next? And
right. He even suggested too that in the 1900s, once these ideas were fulfilled, these kind of communists and social democrats and stuff had basically believed so much in destiny and the path of history, like kind of this kind of Marxist kind of historical determinism, that we don't even have to think about the future. It's going to determine itself. I mean, even now, sadly, liberals don't have a very nice vision they don't have any vision for the future, right? That's why
Zizek talks about.
Yeah, Zizek constantly talks about this. I mean, liberals just don't have a vision for the future of where to take society because all of their experiments kind of failed.
Yeah. In a way, I was kind of detecting a pseudo kind of the grand narratives have collapsed kind of vision in here also. Like all these grand narratives ended and we're just left in this wide open space. Although I wonder, I mean, it'd be interesting to reincorporate Zizek's idea about capitalist ideology taking over too. But
doesn't Ortega give you a sense that we're trapped in the now?
Yes.
He seems like we're saying we're trapped in the now.
Yes. Oh, God, this is exactly where he goes. I thought that was really interesting, too, because, I don't know, just when we were talking about Hoffer, I was taking this back to Hoffer as I was reading. I was like, well, so Hoffer is putting his book out in the 50s, and here's this guy in the 20s. So, of course, some big things happened between the 30s and the 50s.
Right.
And these are some of the things Hoffer is talking about. I think that you can draw some interesting lines of transition between what's happening in Ortega to what happened in Hoffer, but it kind of seems like he's writing at a time where I think this does capture something. I really do think this captures something, and also Hoffer does too. But like he's writing at a time when people have this enormous range of possibilities, and they're kind of sitting there nervously, kind of thinking, what should we do? What if we screw up? I mean, the responsibility. Like as Hoffer talked about, the responsibility on you is so enormous when you get this big range of possibilities. So at this point, they seem to be just kind of not willing to take that first step because they're too afraid to screw up. I don't know. I'm going to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, or they simply just
later.
Don't know what to possibly do.
And
I guess we slowly have to start touching on the fact that having more possibilities creates a life that's more stressful for the person living it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we should at least briefly mention that, the fact that the more options you have, I suppose that you could say you're freer. But the more free you are, the more stressful it will become, because each one of these choices will reflect on you, right? I mean, to put it very simply, no iPad user feels responsible for the way his desktop or it looks, right? I mean, you can't change that. Yeah. But Android users, they can change how their screens look, right? So your screen kind of says something about you when you're an Android user, but when you're using an iPad or an iPhone, it's basically the same thing. So you don't have to worry about that, and no one's going to really critique you for having your icons lined up like little rows, right? Because that's just the way it is. There's nothing you can do about that. So whenever one of your choices, down to the fact that what your phone looks like, is a reflection of you, I mean, you really have to start taking responsibility for almost everything. Like we mentioned in the Hoffer videos, like, staying married is now a statement about you. It's not a statement about society anymore, right? I mean, just every one of these choices, what you wear, what your hair looks like, what you do, how you speak, it's all open. Yes. And limitless choices can kind of, in a way, create limitless suffering in a certain crazy way, right? Yeah. And the possibility for failure becomes, astronomically larger when you have to make more and more different choices. I mean, when you're not running on a rail, it's easier and easier to make those choices, and it's easier and easier to start engaging in counterfactuals. Yes. I should have done that. I should have done this. If only I could have done that. Yes. So possibility lets the mind kind of explode in crazy directions. Right?
Yes. This is going to be really. I can't wait to see where he takes this during the rest of the book, and especially this idea of sitting in the present, because I mean, this is a trap too. This idea of just drifting along and then refusing to choose, which as an early existentialist, he hits all the right notes. Refusing to choose is still a choice. So you sit back and you're kind of like, well, I'm not going to play my cards, and this happens so much to people. Like, well, I'd rather not go, I don't know, ask girls out because I might get shut down. Or I'd rather not write that paper because, I don't know, what if people say bad things about it, kind of thing. It is kind of interesting to think about this also in the context of the emergence of psychotherapy in Freud. I mean, isn't it interesting that Freud emerges right in this era when the mind becomes visible, right?
Yeah. And more choices will create more chances for neuroses. Yeah. Because the level of responsibility on each individual person has now astronomically increased, right? It's doubled and tripled, right? The way people are looking at you, you're going to become more of a neurotic animal, right? You're always looking back on yourself. You always have to second guess yourself and judge yourself, and you don't have the social structures and rules to kind of fall back on and say, well, it's got to be that way. That's the way everyone's doing it. Right? Well, that doesn't exist anymore, right? Unless you go back and try to join the one again, I guess. But so, right, it's going to be a more difficult world, a more stressful world to live in, simply because of its level of freedom. And I guess this is the main thing: is that the second setup to this argument is that life has increased in its potentiality, right? There's just simply more potential to do things. And I thought this is a really clever theory, that the world, whatever you can call the world, is just simply the range of possibilities you have. Heidegger, yes, Heidegger. It's very clever, and I like it a lot. And so in other words, you could literally say for him, the world got bigger. Yeah. The world of the man in the 18th or 17th century was minuscule compared to the world of the man today. And by the world, it's only the range of possibilities he has. Yes. So it's not a small world after all. It's a big world, right? It's a really big world. And with the increases in science, right, I mean, just the fact that we can do more with science. I like what he said. It's so bizarre. He's saying there's more history now.
I like that, too. I was going to mention
it's really good.
Like we're discovering even civilizations we didn't even know about are in a way affecting us by knowledge of their traditions and things like this.
Yeah, in a crazy way, there's more universe.
Yeah.
There's more universe, at least for us.
And also, I mean, just the very idea of like, for example, he mentioned Einstein and like the breakdown of the atom, right? Before the atom was the smallest unit, but now we can get further down than the atom, which opens up even more possibilities. I mean, maybe, and it does really for us in our world. Maybe we can use our science to break things further than the atom and make different machines, make new products, discover new things.
Right. And it is funny that, we are able to do all these things, and thanks to the telegraph, we can now learn about, what did he say, icebergs?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
whatever, penguins walking around. I mean, but the funny thing is, your response to that should be, so what? Right? That's what Thoreau said. So what? Right? What do you do with that information? How do you use that? I mean, you can affect the world, but what are you going to do with that? But there it is, affecting you right now. Now the slightest global incident affects global markets all over the place, and they fluctuate all the time. But it's just harder to make sense of an extremely complicated world now. I mean, how do you make sense of so much data coming in and influencing so many things at different times? You just don't know how to do anything or what to do, right? How do you succeed? I don't know. Nobody knows. So I think there's really a sense of being lost in this kind of epic new world of possibilities. And yet it's still a world where no one wants to trade for the past.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yes.
It's kind of interesting, and I kind of want to think of this in the context of Hoffer. Because, maybe Hoffer was trying to say, well, maybe these people are going to trade their world of possibilities.
Yeah.
Hoffer was saying they couldn't take the world of possibilities.
This is where I was drawing the line, too. Like, these people had all this, and it started not being so good. They started to get frustrated and angry with the fact that they screwed up so much. And it's like, well, let's imagine this golden future and join some mass movements. Yay.
Right. So what are people going to do with this tremendous potential they have? I guess that, and so that's about it. All we have to set up for the next part of this book. Yeah. And I guess I kind of want to follow, too. Let's not talk about it this time, but how desire works in here, right? I mean, the concept of desire in each of the people we've read, like the concept of desire in Plato, Schopenhauer, Hoffer, Ortega, and Epictetus. I mean, they all see desire in a kind of different way, right? I was wondering how Ortega is going to. I mean, if I were to kind of sum it up, it would be something like Plato saw desire as something that had to be controlled by reason. Yep. Schopenhauer saw it as the cause of suffering in the world, which had to be stopped, and it was also unconscious in a kind of way. Your desire kind of worked underneath your intellect. Hoffer kind of felt like desire could lead you to find yourself or completely lose yourself, so it's a danger and a hope. Epictetus said you should have little to no desire. And Ortega seems to see it as kind of like a vital force in history.
Yeah.
That leads history up and down in periods of decadence and affluence. So I don't know. It's interesting following how each one of these thinkers see desire in each one of their works. I'm going to keep that in mind as we go forward.
Yes.
But other than that, I think we can end this one early unless you've got something else to say.
No. I mean, I really, really want to talk about the idea of the masked man, but I can't.
Yes.
I mean, I have a lot of things sitting in front of me about the masked man.
So do I.
But I don't want to say anything just yet.
I mean, he's already talked about the masked man and what kind of a person he is, right? But
it's the middle class, right?
No, it is not the middle class.
Oh, jeez, sorry, that's right. It's not.
It is not the middle class. It's a type of person.
Yes.
In fact, I loved when he said one man can be masked man.
Yeah, I like that too. Yeah, so it's a kind of you're right. It's a quality of person. It's a kind of existence. You can live as a masked man, but for some reason, I also like too where he said like the reason why there are so many of these masked men is because this type of existence has succeeded so well, or spread so much, but it's just because it's this type of existence, not because of the numbers in general.
Right. I mean, we could talk about how he demands nothing of himself, and I guess how he almost has a problem with authority in a crazy way, and he's a kind of a generic, repeated type of man, and he doesn't feel like he has to change himself. But let's wait till next week.
Yeah, definitely.
To start talking about that.
Definitely. Yeah, that's all I got myself. Yep. 800-person dance. Are you coming?
Yeah. Only if there's 801 people.
801. Okay.
Yeah. only.
Sorry.
I mean, I do want to talk about this 800-person dance, but do you want to save that for next week too?
Let's save the 800-person dance also, because it fits in with the mess, man, pretty well, I think.
All right, so we'll talk about the psychology of the masked man next time. All right, that's all for this week. I'm going to continue the discussion probably from chapters 6 to what, 11 or 10?
Probably 6 to 10. Let me take a look, but it's going to be something like that.
All right, cool. Well, that's about it this time. It's going to be a quick one, but this is another one of these kind of hidden gems in philosophy. It's deceptive, too. It deserves a second read.
Yes, definitely. You got to go through it a second time, otherwise you're not going to catch what he's saying.
The first time through, you don't catch it, I think.
Yeah.
This deserves a second or a third read. My fourth time through, I was still seeing things. So I think there's a lot here, but don't be deceived at his plain language, right? It deserves a second read. At least give it a second read, Internet. Come on. I know you have time. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Just cut down your Reddit time a little bit. Come on. All right. All right, that's it for this time. I only got those sound effects working.
Last minute. Yeah.
Last minute. All right, cool. And until next time, see ya.